This week's parsha, we learn about Yosef and his brother, Joseph and his brothers, how they sold him into slavery, and he's on his way to Egypt, and as you can imagine, his life had just been overturned in a dramatic fashion. And the Torah tells us something very interesting about his travels on his way to Egypt, and not only about his travels, about what was accompanying him on his travel. It says that the merchants that purchased him as a slave were carrying various sweet-smelling spices as they were transporting him to Egypt. And Rashi picks up on this seemingly odd description of what was going on with him as he was going down to Egypt, because after all, who cares really what was in the cargo as he was being sold as a slave to Egypt? Says Rashi as follows, that God was being very kind to Joseph, and even when he was being sold as a slave. And normally people, when they were being transported in such a fashion, they would smell these foul-smelling cargo. But because Joseph was righteous, God had preordained that there should be something which was sweet-smelling for Joseph to smell on his way going down to Egypt. And we have to wonder and scratch our heads over this, because after all, who cares? If Joseph is being sold as a slave, and his life, as he knew it, was basically over. A 17-year-old kid sold as a slave. And who cares what was in the cargo? Spices, foul-smelling. After all, his life was over. Says Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz, a very powerful insight on this. And this ties into not only this parsha, but to Hanukkah as well. That Joseph, at the depths of his despair, when he was being sold as a slave, when he thought everything was perhaps over, God was sending him a message. And the message was, even when you think you are down, you are not out. Because even when you walk in the shadow of death, I am still with you. And how do you send that message to Joseph? By sending him those spices. All he had to do was inhale. And he was able to go ahead and not only smell those spices, but behind those spices was that message that God said, I'm even with you in difficult times. And how that is tied into Hanukkah is that over Hanukkah we celebrate not necessarily the military miracle, which was a phenomenal miracle, how the few Maccabees and the small army of the Maccabees defeated the mighty Greeks, but rather we celebrate primarily the miracle of the oil. And the oil is the same miracle that even in the depths of despair, God protected us, and we still found this one flask. That flask was just a reflection of this idea, even when we thought there was so much gloom and darkness around us, he was still sending a message that he was still with us. Folks, in our times, many times we get so discouraged because of all the difficult news we hear around us. And many times things seem so cloudy and dark. Let us remember the lesson of Joseph and his spices. And let us always remember that God is with us even in the most difficult times. Have a wonderful Shabbos.